To make our game a little bit more dynamic, we're going to make a day and night cycle. So it cycles through day and night as time progresses. And we can go ahead and add in a slider so that we can change time and stop time, just for easier for play testing. And then eventually we'll take that out when we actually publish or build our game. So the first thing we need to do is find our direct light. And so if I zoom in straight to that, does not matter where the object is in the game, as long as you can navigate to it and see which direction it's going. So notice it has this little icon on it. So that's called a gizmo. If you click on gizmos in the scene view, you can actually change the size of that icon. So if it's kind of annoying and it's hard to see the actual object, you can make it smaller. Okay, if you zoom in, obviously it makes the icon bigger. So if you zoom out, it also makes it smaller as well. Okay, so to actually make this thing rotate, okay, you can click on the rotation tool and you can move it around. However, we want to do it as the game is run. So if you just rotate this in the scene view, all right, it's going to change what the game actually looks like. And you can change it to nighttime and daytime. So the position of the object doesn't matter. All that matters is the direction of the rays, because that's where all of the light is, in a sense, coming from that represents the sun. Is create a script that's going to make this thing rotate throughout the day. So to keep all of our scripts organized, organization is key. Right click on asset, create a folder. We're going to call it scripts. This is where we're going to put all of our code. So inside of this folder, I'm going to right click, create, and we have two different languages we can play with, C# or JavaScript. Or you can actually create a shader, which is used for rendering objects, but we're going to stick with C# for the remainder of these tutorials. So if you click on C#, it's going to create a new script. I'm just going to call this DayNight Controller. We don't want to have any spaces in our script name, so I'm going to leave out all the spaces, and even though it has 3 multiple words, I'm just going to put it in with no spaces. As soon as I hit enter, it's going to create the script and compile it. You get a little symbol down in the right-hand corner. Goes through and compiles that script. And then this is what this script actually looks like in code. To actually open it up in an editor, you just have to double-click it. The default text editor for Unity is MonoDevelop, and that's what we'll be using to go ahead and type in and edit code and get our game to work the way we want it to. So this is what the script looks like when you open it up. Okay, so we have our DayNight controller, and then it has 2 pre-made functions or methods for us to use. This is used for initialization, so as soon as the game is started, this method is run. Update is very similar to the timer tick that we used on Visual Basic or Visual Studio, where this is run every single frame. So this method is going to be called every single frame and updates anything that we put in it. So the first thing we want to do is actually get this thing to rotate every single frame. So inside of the update method, we're just going to do transform, which grabs the transform component of our directional light. So right here, so here's our transform component. And then we're going to tell it to rotate. And notice that I put a dot in there. So this is the rotate method of the transform component. And now we're going to give it what's called a vector 3. Okay, a vector 3, whoops, sorry, not a vector 2. Notice IntelliSense popped up here. Okay, so what we're going to type in is basically a rotation. Okay, right here we're going to use method 5 of 6. So we're looking for 3 float values. Float in C# just means decimals. So we're going to type in 3 decimal values that it's going to rotate about in a 3D view. Okay, so when we want to type in a float value, we have to put an F at the end of the number. So 0F, F for float, so it's a decimal value. 5F, so a value of 5, so it's going to rotate 5 degrees around the y-axis, and then 0F. So all this does is tell the object to rotate 5 degrees around the y-axis every frame, which is normally around 60 frames per second. So we can save this by either hitting Control-S or going to File, Save. When you come back into Unity, it's going to recompile the script. You probably see a little icon down in the bottom right. And now if we go to playtest, And I'm doing this on purpose. Notice that nothing's changing. All right. However, if you take your script and you actually add it to the object, now the script's actually going to be run. So the script needs to be on some object that's inside of your scene, not just the project itself. So if I drag this into here, now the sun's rotating, but much too quickly. All right, so it's going through night and day super, super fast. You can actually see the sun coming down here on the corner. All right, so a couple things we're going to do. I'm going to change this from directional light to sun just to be a little bit more descriptive of the object. And now we need an ability to slow down and increase it just to do testing, okay, instead of actually putting a value in here. All right, so we're going to create two public variables. Just one. We want a public float, so this is going to be a decimal value, and I'm going to call it slider position. Okay, and you'll see why here in a second. So now instead of putting in a number right here, we're just going to use the value of the slider position. So the whole purpose of that, if I go back into Unity, and I then go ahead and add my script onto my sun, notice that we now have a variable slot right here that we can change. So instead of having a hard value of 5 in there, we can now change it to whatever we want. 2, 1, okay? And it's much easier instead of going into the script and changing it just for testing. So that'll take care of that. But now, in order to be able to do it in game as well, we're going to create a new method called onGUI. This is graphical user interface. So the reason we're creating this is so that we can put in a slider in game that we'll be able to manipulate and change how fast the day cycles through. So we're going to say slider position dot horizontal slider, and this is what's going to create a slider on the scene view, and we want a new rectangle. So as you can see, when you create a horizontal slider, gives you a little summary here, it needs 4 values. All right, the first one is a rectangle position. So where is the slider actually going to be displayed in screen coordinates? So type in these values, 25, 25, 130. We're actually going to use the 4th one here. So that's the amount of pixels from the top left of the screen, 25 from the top, and the width of the slider will be 100, and the height of the slider will be 30. All right, we're going to give the slider the same value as the variable we created, and then it wants a min and a max value. So the min is 0, that's going to stop the sun from rotating, and we'll give it a max of 1. All right, that should be enough to get that going. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and exit out of here, go back to Unity after saving, make sure that we don't have any errors, and my slider position is going to be at 1 right now, and let's see how fast the day cycles through here. Okay, so it still seems a little fast. So now what we can do is change this slider. You'll see a slider in the top left, and you can actually go through and slow how fast the sun will rotate. Okay, you'll want to note the value in here. So for example, if I want my slider to stay where it's at right now, since I'm playtesting, if I stopped, it wouldn't save. So I have to take this and copy it, exit playtesting, and then paste it back in. That way it'll start at that value every time I start the game. Okay, for some added special effects, what we can do is actually add in a lens flare, which is pretty darn cool. So if you have imported your standard assets under Effects, right here, so Standard Assets, Effects, Light Flares, Flares, you actually have 3 of them to choose from. You have Sun. There we go. So you get a type of glare. So that's the 50mm zoom. You have Flare Small, which makes that. And then you have Sun, which makes it look like that. So it gives it a little more effect if you're looking right into the sun. My favorite's the 50mm zoom because then you get the little lighting effects. So let me go back to game view and I'll look at the sun here as it sets. it will be able to see it briefly. There it is. So it's coming in and it's setting, so it's closer to the horizon. So you can see the effect, and then it disappears as it goes below the horizon. All right, notice that we do get a little bit of lighting for each of the trees, and there's some advanced features, or I'm sorry, advanced properties that we would need to change some of that. So what we can do is, if you need to find your lighting panel, you can go up into Window, and you should see a panel for lighting. So all I did was open this up. During playtesting, it's nice to look at these values, so I'm going to increase this to nighttime a little bit. So notice that you can still see objects almost as plain as day. So what I did is I went ahead and took my sun and put it in this box right here, so it knew what the sun was. And your ambient source could be a color, or it could be a gradient, or you can just use the skybox itself. And what I did is I went and did the reflection source, and you can change it to custom. Okay, so now your character doesn't change in light, but the terrain does. So if you want fog in your game, you can go ahead and check the fog. That way, when you see further into the distance, it's a little bit fogged out. Okay, something like that. So since we did make these changes during playtesting, you have to go back in and change them. So you can change those the way you like. All right, that's it for changing the directional light. Hopefully you got a little intro to programming. If you have any questions on anything that we did in code, let me know. And we're going to continue with that and create some collectibles so the player has some objectives.